Masechet Baba Batra Daf Tet Vav. We're in the middle of a long baraita that's talking about the authorship of the various books in Tanakh. Yirmiyah katav sifro v'sefer melachim v'kinot. Yirmiyah wrote his book, the Sefer Yirmiyah, and also the Book of Kings, which makes sense because it lists all the history up until the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, and Yirmiyah was alive at that time, and Echa Kinot, which is lamentations on the destruction, and so that makes sense that Yirmiyah would have written that. Chizkiah v'si'ato katbu Yeshaya, Mishlei, Shir HaShirim, ve'Kohelet. This is a bit surprising that Yeshaya did not write the book of Yeshaya himself, but rather King Chizkiah and the members that were with him, his colleagues, they wrote Sefer Yeshaya, perhaps because Yeshaya died young. He was killed by King Menashe, so maybe at the end of his life he didn't have a chance to gather together and edit his work, and so it was later King Chizkiah that did so. And also these three books that are associated with King Shlomo, Mishlei, Shir HaShirim, and Kohelet. Also King Shlomo, according to one midrash, he did not fill out his monarchy, but was removed from kingship early, and so that might be related to it. But also, it's actually an explicit pasuk in Mishlei 25. It says these are the proverbs of Shlomo, which were copied by the colleagues of Chizkiah, king of Yehuda. So actually, Mishlei, it says so explicitly in the book of Mishlei, that although they are attributed to King Shlomo, they were passed on and then finally edited, in fact, by King Chizkiah. And so since King Chizkiah says that he edited Mishlei, so it makes sense that he and his colleagues also were the final editors of Shir HaShirim and Kohelet. So the men of the Great Assembly, that's the sages in the early Persian period, they're the ones that wrote the book of Yechezkel. And again, when it says wrote, it doesn't mean that they wrote it from scratch. Obviously, these are the prophecies of Yechezkel, authentic prophecies that he spoke, and maybe he wrote them, or someone who heard them wrote them, like a scribe, like certainly Yirmiyah had a scribe, Baruch, that was with him, that wrote down what he said. But the point is that the editing, putting together of the book of Yechezkel was not done by him himself, but rather by these later sages. And also Terei Asad, all the Nevi'im of Terei Asad, they were prophets. They wrote their own prophecies, but putting them all together as they are, maybe even deciding which ones belong in, which prophecies do not. The Gemara elsewhere says, not every single thing that a prophet said is recorded for posterity, only that which will be relevant for future generations. And so too, the book of Daniel and Megillat Esther was not written by Daniel himself or Esther herself, but rather by Anshe Knesset Gedolah. Why these? Why didn't they write them themselves? Well, one common denominator is that Yechezkel lived outside the land of Israel, so did Daniel and Esther, and so maybe that has to do with it. Anshe Knesset Gedolah in the Persian period are back in the land of Israel, and so while there are prophets outside the land of Israel, perhaps the codification and editing, finalization of these holy scriptures has to be in the land of Israel. That might be the reason why. Ezra katav sifro v'yachas shel divrei hayamim ad lo. Ezra did live in the land of Israel. He wrote his own book, Sefer Ezra, and he wrote also part of Sefer Divrei Hayamim. When it says the book of Ezra, that includes Ezra Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah are actually one book. That we just call it Ezra and part of it Nehemiah. He also wrote part of Divrei Hayamim, only the part of the genealogy until his own life. He could not have written the genealogy after his life. מסייע לרב, דאמר רב יהודה אמר רב, לא עלה עזרא מבבל עד שייחס עצמו ועלה. This baraita about Ezra supports something that Rav said, for Rav Yehuda taught in the name of Rav that Ezra did not come from Bavel to Eretz Israel until he first established his own genealogy. Ezra was very particular to make sure that all those who were returning back, he would know their genealogy, make sure that they're of proper lineage, and so he checked himself first before he make aliyah. Let me show that I am from a good lineage. Uman asikeh Nehemiah ben Chilkiah. So who completed the book of Divrei Hayamim? Nehemiah, who came soon after Ezra completed the book. Amar Mor, Yoshua katav sifro shmona pesukim shebatorah. So now we're going back to the beginning of the Baraita, where it said that Yoshua wrote his book, Sefer Yoshua, and Yoshua also wrote the last 8 pesukim of the Torah, where it says Moshe died. Tanya, keman de amar shmona pesukim shebatorah Yoshua ketaban. De Tanya, vayamot sham Moshe ayebed Adonai, efshar Moshe met v'chatav vayamot sham Moshe, ela ad kan katav Moshe mikan ve'elach katav Yoshua, divrei Rabbi Yehuda ve'amri ila Rabbi Nehemiah. So this opinion that we saw in the previous Braita, that Yoshua wrote the last 8 pesukim, there is another Braita that says the same thing. Right? In other words, that Braita follows these opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah. We'll see a differing opinion in a second. That says the last 8 pesukim of the Torah, Yoshua wrote them, because within those last 8 pesukim it says Moshe died. Moshe, the servant of God, died there. Is it possible that Moshe died and he's writing after he died? I died after he died. He couldn't have written it. There's another version of this Gemara that says Chai here, which is the same thing. Can it be that Moshe is alive and he wrote Moshe died? Moshe can't write something that's not true, and so it's impossible that Moshe wrote those words. Rather, up until that point, Moshe wrote the entire Torah. But from that pasuk on, the last 8 pesukim, Yehoshua wrote it. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah, and that's the opinion of the long Baraita that we just learned. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon, efshar sefer Torah chaser ot achat uchtiv lakoach et sefer haTorah hazeh. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, right? Can it be that you're going to have a sefer Torah? If it's missing one letter, then it's invalid. And the pasuk says, towards the end of Sefer Devarim, Moshe says, take this sefer Torah. So that means he's presenting the people with a Sefer Torah that sounds like it's a complete Sefer Torah. Even if it was missing one letter, it would be incomplete. You couldn't say, here is the Sefer Torah. And surely, if it's missing 8 pesukim that Moshe did not write, it would not be a complete Sefer Torah. And so that's impossible to say Yehoshua wrote it. Ela ad kan HaKadosh Baruch Hu omer, u'Moshe omer v'choteb. Mikan ve'elach HaKadosh Baruch Hu omer, Moshe koteb bedema, k'Moshe ne'emar lehalan. Ve'omer lehem Baruch mipiv, יקרא אליי את כל הדברים האלה ואני כותב על הספר בדיו. Rather, until this point in the Torah, meaning the whole Torah, until the last pesukim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would say the words, Moshe would say them again, and he would write them. This is very interesting that Moshe would repeat the words verbally and only then write them. That's for the whole Torah. But for that last 8 pesukim, Hashem would say them, he would dictate, and Moshe would only write them in tears. The key difference is, well, there's 2 differences. Number 1, he would write them in tears. Some say he didn't use ink, he used tears. But then it still wouldn't be a kosher Sefer Torah if you write it with tears. But rather, he wrote it, you could say simply, he wrote it while he was crying. But the key difference is that Moshe did not repeat the words himself. Hashem said it and Moshe wrote it. Whereas for the rest of the Torah, Hashem said it, Moshe repeated it. So I think this makes a big difference. The point is that by Moshe saying it, right, then Moshe as a Navi is someone who speaks the word, like the 10 Commandments. First Hashem said it, Moshe says it before it was written down. Then he went back to up the mountain, and then got the written version. The written version is only a pointer to, is only a record of the verbal declaration by the Navi. So the Hashem has to say it first, then the Navi repeats it verbally. That's his announcement, that's his giving of the prophecy, and the record is only a pointer, a record of what the Navi said. So if the Navi didn't say it, then it's of a different status. And therefore, for the whole Torah, Moshe could repeat it, say it verbally, because he's announcing, here, this is the law, this is the story, this is what happened. But since Moshe did not die yet, he cannot say, and Moshe died. But what he can do is simply hear Hashem say it and write it, because then he's not verbalizing it, so he's not announcing that this has happened, so he can write it down, and then later on, that future generations will read it, and then, after it comes true. So Moshe did write it, but missing that step of Moshe repeating it. So that seems to be the key here, and he's writing it while he's crying, because he's writing about his own death, which makes sense. And how do we know that? Because look at the pasuk where Baruch ben Neriah, the scribe of Yirmiyah, is explaining how his role. And Baruch said, Baruch mepiv yikra, that Yirmiyah dictated all the words to me, and I wrote them down with ink in a scroll. And so that explains, right? First, the prophet has to say it, and then it can be written down, either by Baruch, here was the scribe, or Moshe. In Moshe's case, Moshe was both the Navi and the scribe. So that's the normal way of writing Nivu'ah, is that the Navi has to say it first, and then write it. But the last 8 Pesukim were done in a different way, and that could be done even though the event didn't happen yet. Keman azla hada amar Rabbi Yehoshua bar Abba amar Rav Gidel amar Rav Shimon pesukim shebatorah achid koreh otan le'emar Rabbi Yehuda udela keRabbi Shimon. So who will the following opinion follow? For Rabbi Yehoshua, the son of Abba, said in the name of Rav Gidel, in the name of Rav, that when you're reading in Bet Knesset the last 8 pesukim of the Torah, you have to give the last 8 pesukim to one oleh. You can't split it up into 2 different aliyot. One aliyah has to be one aliyah. You can't split it. Must be that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that this was written by Yoshua, and therefore has different laws that apply to it. For the rest of the Torah written by Moshe, there you can split up into at least 3 pesukim sections at the proper stops. But since this last section was written in a different way, the different laws apply to it. And this would not be opinion of Rabbi Shimon, because according to Rabbi Shimon, Moshe wrote the last 8 pesukim also, so the same laws should apply. And just like you can split and other pesukim into multiple aliyot, so too, according to Rabbi Shimon, you should be able to split the last 8 pesukim into multiple aliyot. But we say not necessarily. Afilu tema Rabbi Shimon ho'il v'ishtanu. It could even be Rabbi Shimon, since it's the last pesukim was written in a different way, although it was Moshe, but Moshe did not recite it first and then write it. He only heard it and wrote it without reciting it first. So since it's different, maybe in fact the halachot of the last 8 pesukim are different, and Rabbi Shimon would agree that one oleh has to read all the last 8 pesukim. Next, Yoshua katab sifro. V'haketiv hayamot Yoshua bin Nun Ibed Adonai. The Baraita said that Yoshua wrote his book, but in Yoshua 24 it says that Yoshua died. So he died before the end. He could not have completed the book. Tasike Elazar. After Yoshua died, Elazar, the son of Aharon, the Kohen, wrote the rest of it. V'haketiv Elazar ben Aharon met. Hold on. In just 4 pesukim later, this is pasuk 29, this is pasuk 33. So okay, Elazar wrote those 4 pesukim, but then Elazar himself died. So who wrote the rest of it? Taseke Pinchas. Pinchas completed the book. Shemuel katav sifro. Hakatib Shemuel met. Shemuel wrote the book of Shemuel, but Shemuel dies. Actually, in Shemuel Aleph he dies. What about the whole Shemuel Bet? Taseke Gad HaChozeh v'Natan HaNavi. 2 later prophets, Gad and Natan, who lived continued to live after Shemuel, they wrote it. David katav Sefer Tilim ayde asara zekenim v'lichshav nameh et hanazrechi. King David wrote Sefer Tilim by the means of 10 elders. There was 10 elders that lived before David, and each wrote different things, and David collected them, added more. And so it was a group effort. So, and it listed these 10 elders that are associated with headings that are in Sefer Tehillim. And now we ask, why did they leave out Natan Ezrachi? Natan Ezrachi, Mizmor 89, is attributed to him. So he should be also one of the authors, should be 11. Amarav Etan Ezrachi, Zehu Abraham. Kitibacha Etan Ezrachi, Kitibatam, Miha Irme Mizrach, Sedek. Etan Ezrachi is another name for Abraham, and Abraham is already in the list of 10 people. How do we know that? Because it says here, Etan Ezrachi, and it says in Yeshaya, who raised up from the east. East, Mizrach sounds like Ha-Ezrachi, whom righteousness met wherever he set foot. So you see, as Etan Ha-Ezrachi, the person from the east, is in fact Abraham, who was born in Ur-Kasdim from the east and came to Eretz Yisrael. So it's in fact the same person. Kachashib Moshe v'Kachashib Heman. And now we ask, well, within the list of 10 people of the elders there, we have 2 people that are really the same person, Moshe and Heman. Heman is a nickname for Moshe. V'amar Rav Heman ze Moshe. Ketiv acha Heman uchtiv hatam b'chol beti ne'eman hu. Because we have the word Heman, that's his name, and regarding Moshe it says, he is trusted in all my house. And the Ne'eman and Heman sound the same. And so Rav said that these are the same person. So why are you listing among the 10 elders Moshe and Heman if they're the same person? And the answer is Tere Heman Havu. There was actually two people named Heman. One of them was Moshe, and that guy had two names, Moshe and Heman. And there was another individual who was also named Heman, who was not Moshe. And that person is the one that wrote that Mizmor, and therefore he is listed separately. Moshe katab sifro uparashat Bil'am ve'Iyob. Mesayeh Rabbi Levi bar Lachma. Damar Rabbi Levi bar Lachma. Iyob ime Moshe haya kitibacha mi ten efo v'katibun milai. Uchtivatam ubame yivada efo. Moshe wrote his book and Parashat Bil'am. We discussed this yesterday. And Moshe also wrote the book of Iyob. This baraita that attributes the book of Iyob to authorship of Moshe supports that which Rabbi Levi bar Lachma said, for he said that Eov lived during the time of Moshe. So if Eov was contemporary with Moshe, it makes sense that Moshe would have written this story. And how do we know that? Because it says in the book of Eov, oh, that my words were written now. And this is the word ephah, a pretty rare word. And it also says in Sefer Shemot, for in what shall it be known here? Ephah, Moshe says this in his prayers after Het HaEgel. So since this is the word ephah there and ephah here, it makes sense that Moshe is the author. Sometimes you can tell the author from style or certain vocabulary that is in the book, and so here we have the same vocabulary or kind of a gezerah shava. It also is, this pasuk is about being written, so we're connected, and Moshe wrote it. So that supports, this opinion is supported in this baraita. Wait a second, if you're going to follow the word ephah, that this is this word appears in Eov, so wherever else it appears, that's when Eov lived. But then you could equally say that Eov lived during the time of Yitzchak, because Yitzchak says, who then is he that has taken this animal, right? Who brought this animal to me? Was it Esav? Was it Yaakov? So then that he says the word ephah. Or it could be that Eov lived during the time of Yaakov, because Yaakov also says the word ephah when he tells his sons, take extra gifts and take them back to Yosef. Or maybe Eov lived during the time of Yosef, because there also it says, right, ephah, where are my brothers tending to their flock? So it says the word ephah actually many times in different generations. So how are you going to tell which one is which, and which one is related to Eov? Allah sakadatech tichtiv mi yiten basefer v'yuchaku moshehu diikre mechokek tichtiv vayad eshit lo kisham chelkat mechokek safun. Oh no, don't think it's any of these, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Yosef, because look at the rest of that same pasuk. It says, oh, that my words were inscribed, from the word ve'yuchaku, in a book. And who is called the inscriber? That's Moshe, as it says in Devarim, and he provided the first part for himself, for there was the inscriber's portion reserved, referring to Moshe. So in this pasuk is actually two references to Moshe, even though the word ephah appears elsewhere, but the inscriber, that has to be Moshe, and therefore Moshe, according to this view, is the author of the book of Eov. Rava amar Eov b'mei meraglim haya ketiv hacha ish haya be'eres Utz Eov shemo uchtivatam hayesh ba'etz. Rava says that Eov lived during the time of the spies. That's actually also during the time of the meraglim. So it's not only saying about time period; it's also relating something in the book to the events that we're connecting him to. And so he was around during the generation of the spies, because there was regarding Eov, it says there was a man in the land of Utz. His name was Eov, and it says regarding the Meraglim that the Moshe said, go check, are there trees? And Etz and Utz are the same letters. We ask, Mida me hacha utz hatam etz. We say, well, that's not the same. Just because they're the same letters, these are different words. Utz is the name of a place, the land of Oz. Probably the Wizard of Oz got it from the Sefer Eov, right? A wise man, and so on. And Hatam and Oder is talking about trees, not the name of a place. So it sounds the same, but they're completely different. What does one have to do with each other? Hachi ka'amar lehu Moshe l'Yisrael yeshno le'oto adam sheshonotav arukot ka'etz umegen al doro ka'etz. Now this is what Moshe was saying to Israel when he said, go and see if there is a tree. What kind of question is that? Of course there's trees, right? What do you think? Every land has trees. So no, rather Moshe was telling the spies to go see is there that guy, the Utz guy, who lived a long time. He lived as long as trees. Trees live a long time, and he protects a generation like a tree. A tree offers protection. Is that guy Eov? Is he around? Go see if he lives in the land of Israel. And because he was looking for him, that Eov lived a long time and is a righteous person who protects the generation. And so, therefore, according to this, Eov lived during the time of the Midaglim, and the Midaglim were supposed to go and see if he was around. Yativ hahu mirabanan kameh dirbi Shemuel bar Nachmani yatev kamar Eov lo haya velo nibra ela mashal haya. There was a certain sage that was sitting before Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmi as a student, and he was sitting, and he said, Eov never was created. He never existed. Rather, the entire book is a parable. It's a parable about a theoretical person that's named Eov, and bad things happen to him, and this is a theoretical meditation on why bad things happen to good people, set up as a test. This would solve a lot of problems, like how could I have a Satan that makes a bet with Hashem, and Hashem says, yeah, go and punish him and kill his children just to see, and all that. But if you say it's a mashal, then you say, okay, he is an example of a suffering person, and everybody feels some suffering, and so this is a way of creating a theoretical situation so that we can philosophize and think about why bad things happen. And so this is a mashal. However, the teacher, Rabbi Shemuel, disagreed, and he said, that's why, to counter your opinion that Eov never actually existed, that's why the pasuk opens up and says, there was a man in the land of Utz, and his name was Eov. It's giving you particulars about his name, about where he lived, so that you won't say he didn't exist. He did exist. This is where he was. If it was a parable, then you just say, once upon a time in a land far away. You wouldn't have to give details. You wouldn't have to give his name. There was a man, and that's it. So the details show that he really did exist. Now, even though Rabbi Shemuel rejects this, but Rambam says, listen, there is one opinion, and Rambam follows this opinion that the book of Eov is a mashal. And now we ask about this. Just because it gives details, it doesn't mean that it's not a mashal. After all, when Natan HaNavi comes to King David and says, Atah ha'ish, so first he says to King David, there was two people in the city. One was rich and one was poor, and the rich man had many flocks, but the poor person, he only had one little lamb that he bought, and he gave it food, and then the rich person came and took that one little lamb, and so on, right? And King David says, he should be punished, and then King Natan says, this was just a mashal. This was a mashal for you. So here you see that even though this was a mashal, nevertheless, the Navi Natan gives particular details about this guy and what he had and what he did. So just because you give details doesn't mean that it didn't. That has to be literally true. So just like that is a parable, so too we can say that even these details are just filling in a parable. But no, we reject that because it gives his name and the name of a city. Regarding the Tanakh Hanavi, it doesn't give a name of this poor person and where he lived. He gives other details that are necessary for the parable to know there was a poor person, just like this guy had one wife, and there's another guy who had many wives, and the King David, you took his one wife, and so on. So those details are necessary. But why is it necessary to give the land and his name? Rather, that shows that he was a real person. Rabbi Yochanan וRabbi Elazar damre tarvaihu Eov me'oleh gola haya bet midrasho betiberia haya. Now, two other opinions. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar say that Eov was in exile in Bavel, and he came back from exile to Eretz Yisrael in the beginning of the second Bet HaMikdash period, during the Persian rule. And he had a Bet Midrash, and it was in Tiberias, and that's where he studied. Hold on, there's a Braita that contradicts this, because it says that Eov's life was from the time that Bnei Israel entered Egypt until they left, which means Eov lived way back during the Egyptian slavery, not during the Persian period? We can answer, Ema ke misha'a shenichnesu Yisrael Misraim v'ad sha'a sheyasu. No, the Baraita wasn't saying that he lived during the Egyptian exile. It just means he lived as long as the Egyptian exile, however long that was, 210 years, 400 years, however you want to calculate it. That's how long he lived. We had a reference before when Moshe said, is he still alive, that guy who lived a long time? Well, that what we said over there when Moshe was asking the Meraglim, that would fit with this Baraita, that Yov lived a long time. Not that he was a slave in Egypt, he was in Eretz Yisrael, but he lived through this whole time. Moshe says, is he still around? Is he there in Israel? Okay, so that would, this Baraita would fit with that. But here we're saying it can be reconciled with the Rabbi Yochanan also, because we just mean that he lived a very long time, as long as the exile. But it could be that he actually lived later during the Persian period. Now, this Baraita also actually could fit with the mashal idea that Yov's life is a parallel to the Bnei Israel going into exile, suffering loss for a long time, and then redemption. At the end of Yov, he gets everything back, he's redeemed. And this would be a meditation. Why does Israel have to suffer as slaves for all those years? And right, and then he does get redeemed and gets everything back. So this could be more subtly a reference to the idea of Yov as a symbol for the suffering of Bnei Israel through exile. ואיוב, ואליפז התימני, ובלדד השוחי, וסופד הנמתי, ואליהו בן ברחאל הבוזי. Now we have an objection, because above it says that Eov was, according to Yochanan, he was one of the Jews that went from Bavel and made Aliyah during the Persian period. So that means he was Jewish. However, here we have a Braita that seems to indicate that Eov was not Jewish, because it says that there were 7 Nevi'im who prophesied to the nations of the world, which suggests that they were not Jewish. And they are Bilam, who certainly wasn't Jewish, and Bilam's father, and Eov. And also the other characters in Eov, Eliphaz, Bildad, Sofar, Elihu, ben Berechel Habuzi. So this means that they were not Jewish. Amarle, v'ta'amich Elihu ben Berachel, lab Misrael hava. However, the response here of Rabbi Yochanan is that, well, according to you, Elihu, are you saying that Elihu also is not Jewish? He was from the family of Ram, which is associated with Avraham, and so therefore Avraham certainly is Jewish, and so at least one of the people on this list is Jewish. So just because you're on this list doesn't mean you're not Jewish. So you might also be Jewish. Rather, this Baraita is just listing people that prophesied to non-Jews, but they themselves could be Jewish or non-Jewish. And so just like Elihu was certainly Jewish, so to Eov was Jewish, and he gave prophecies to non-Jews, but that's no proof that he himself wasn't Jewish. Now we ask, wait a second, all the prophets give prophecies to non-Jews, right? There's many prophecies in Yirmiyah and Yeshaya to other nations, and so why aren't they listed in this list? Why only these 7? And the answer is, Hatam ikar nebi'utayhu l'Israel, hacha ikar nebi'utayhu l'umot ha'olam. No, over there, those other prophets, most of their prophecies were for Jews, and then once in a while they said something to non-Jews. Whereas these 7, most of their prophecies were to the non-Jewish nations. Another objection to the idea that Eov was Jewish. Chasid haya ba'umot ha'olam ve'Eov shema. There was a pious man of the nations of the world, meaning not Jewish, and his name was Eov. Ve'lo ba'al ha'olam ela kedei lekabel secharo. Hevi HaKadosh Baruch Hu alav yisurin, hitchil mecharef u'megadef, kafal lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu secharo ba'olam hazeh kedei letaredo min ha'olam haba. And he only came into this world to receive his reward in this world, and so that Hashem would not have to give him reward in the next world. And so Hashem brought him here, and he gave him suffering, and he cursed and blasphemed, and then Hashem was able to give him double reward, which is the end of Eov. He gets double reward in this world, not as a good thing, but rather so he can remove him from the world to come. And so you see over here clearly that Eov was not Jewish. And that's a challenge to the opinion before that says he was Jewish because he was one of the returnees from exile. And we answer Tana'ehi. In fact, it was machloket among Tanaim. And so Rabbi Yochanan could follow one Tana, and this Braita is the other Tana, the Tanya, along Braita. There's a few different opinions. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Eov b'mesh shefot hashofetim haya, she'emar hen atem kulechem chazitem, ולמה זה הבל תהבלו? איזה דור שכולו הבל? הווה אומר זה דורו של שפוט השופטים. So the first opinion is saying that Eov is Jewish. He lived during the time of the judges. Now we're going to interpret bimei shefot hashofetim as during a generation where the people judge the judges, that the judges have no authority because they themselves are corrupt and the people are judging the judges. As it says in the book of Eov, behold, all you yourselves have seen it. Why then have you become altogether vain? A generation when everybody is hebel, no good. So where is a generation that everything is vain? This is a generation where the people judge the judges, then everything's going to go badly. And that's when Eov lived. So according to this, well, okay, he could be Jewish. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha Omer, Eov בימי אחשוורוש היה שנאמר, ולא נמצא נשים יפות כבנות איוב בכל הארץ. איזהו דור שנתבקשו בו נשים יפות? הווה אומר, זה דורו של אחשוורוש. So another opinion within this Braita is Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, who will also say that Eov is Jewish. Eov lived during the time of Achashverosh. How do you know? Because it says in the book of Eov at the end that there were not found beautiful women in all of the land as the daughters of Eov. And now when there was a generation that the people were seeking out beautiful women, that was in the generation of Achashverosh, when he made a beauty pageant to find his queen. So we make a connection, and Eov must have lived during at that time. But again, he could be Jewish. Hold on. If it's because he had beautiful daughters, it could be during the time of David. David, when he was old, also they were looking for a beautiful maiden to keep David warm. No, over there, they were looking within the borders of Israel, whereas in Achashverosh it says the borders of the land. And in Eov it says also Bechol Haaretz, so it makes more sense to connect Eov with the time of Achashverosh. Rabbi Natan Omer, continuing the Braita, a third opinion, Eov b'mei malchut Sheba haya, shenemar, vatipol Sheba, vatikachem. Eov lived during the time of the Queen of Sheba, meaning the time of King Shlomo, because it says in the beginning of Eov that Sheba, an army from this foreign nation of Sheba, came and took Eov's stuff away. והחכמים אומרים איוב בימי כסתים היה שנאמר כסתים שמו שלושה ראשים. Yet another opinion of Chachamim continues the story. Eov keeps getting messengers, each one giving more bad news, and then after the Sabians, and the fire comes down and destroys property, and then it says the Kastim came. That's the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, and they formed three groups, and they took Eov's stuff and killed the boys and so on. And so Eov must have lived during that time, because it says the Kastim came. And the last opinion in this long Baraita says that Eov lived during the time of Yaakov, and he married Dinah, Yaakov's daughter. How do we know? Because it says in the book of Eov, you speak like one of the Nebelot, one of the loathsome women speak. And it says regarding Dinah that a loathsome act has been done to Dinah by Shechem. And since it says the same word, Gezer Ashava, it must be that Eov married Dinah. Now, if he married Dinah, well, Eov is not counted, is not listed as one of the sons of Yaakov. And if he's not one of the sons of Yaakov, then he is not Jewish. And there you go. We have this one opinion here that says Eov is not Jewish. And that would be also the same as the Braita that we just saw, that Eov is not not Jewish, and Rabbi Yochanan, who says that Eov is Jewish, can follow one of these other opinions. Right? As Gemara notes, all of the Tanaim think that Eov was Jewish, except for the Yeshomrim, that says he married Dinah. That means he was not one of the children of Yaakov, so he was not Jewish. Now, if you think that he was not Jewish, so how do you know that all the other opinions, I mean, how do you know just because he had beautiful daughters and he was in time of Achashverosh, maybe he wasn't Jewish? How do you know that he was Jewish? And so the proof is that that after Moshe died, was there Shekhinah on the foreign nations that anybody else could be a prophet? We're assuming Eov had prophecy, and he would not be able to have prophecy after the time of Moshe, because V'hamamor Bikesh Moshe shelo tishre Shekhinah al umot haolam v'nitan lo shnemar v'niflinu ani ve'amecha. Moshe prayed to Hashem that Shekhinah should not rest upon any of the other nations, that they should have prophecy, as Moshe said that the Jewish people should be differentiated from all the other people in the world. So therefore there were non-Jewish prophets before Moshe. In the time of Moshe, we could count Bilam, but not after Moshe. And therefore, Yov, who we ascribe prophecy to, must have been Jewish, because these time periods, like Achashverosh and so on, and Shevot HaShofetim, are all after Moshe. So since they're after Moshe, and assuming Eov was a prophet, and assuming that there are no non-Jewish prophets after Moshe, therefore all these opinions must agree that Eov was Jewish. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Doro shel Eov shatu b'zimah hayashnemar, hen atem kulechem chazitem velama zeh heber tehebalu, uchtiv shubi shubi hashulamit, shubi shubi v'nechazeh bach. So now we're going to continue on more exposition on the book of Eov. Rabbi Yochanan says that the generation of Eov was awash in licentiousness, as it says, the pasuk that we already quoted, behold, all of you yourselves have seen it. Why then have you become altogether vain? So there's hevel all around, and with this word chazitem that you saw, we also find in Shir HaShirim where it says, return, Shulamite, return, that we may look upon you. So look upon this woman, Shulamit, look upon in a licentious way, and that's the same word over here in Eov, chazitem. So, and it says everybody is involved in this sin. Hold on, why are you assuming chazitem means that they're looking at the woman in a negative way? Maybe the chazitem is like chazon. Maybe that the generation had so much nevuah, like it says chazon Yeshaya. No. If so, why would the pasuk continue and say everything is vain? That's a negative. So if it was nevuah, then everything would be positive. But since it says everything is hebel, that means that the generation was awash in zima. ואמר רבי יוחנן, מה דכתיב? ויהי בימי שפוט השופטים, דור ששופט את שופטיו. אומר לו, טול קסם מבין עיניך. אומר לו, טול קורה מבין עיניך. אמר לו, כספך היה לשיגים. אמר לו, סובך מהול במים. Rabbi Yochanan says, what does it mean when it says it was during the time of the judging of the judges, the first pasuk in Megillat Ruth? This is a generation that judges its own judges. So let's say a judge is giving judgment to someone and says, listen, you're in the wrong, you have to take the splinter out of your eyes. Splinter meaning as a symbol of a sin. You have a small sin, take her out of your eyes. So then that litigant, what would he say back to the judge? You're telling me that I should correct my little sin? Take the beam from your eyes, because the judge himself is so corrupt. So no one's going to give respect to a judge who's so corrupt. Or if the judge says that your silver is dross, meaning you have counterfeit coins. What is the guy who does have counterfeit coins? What does he do? He says back to the judge, you're telling me I should get rid of my counterfeit coins? Your wine is mixed with water and you sell it as pure wine. And so you see a generation that's all corrupt, that there's no justice. Amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yonatan Kol Omer Malkat Sheba Isha Ita Eno Ela To'eh Mai Malkat Sheba Malchuta Tishba. Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani in the name of Rabbi Yonatan says, anyone who says that Queen of Sheba was a woman is mistaken, because Malkat Sheba does not mean the Queen of Sheba, but rather Malchut. It's a kingdom. Melucha is a nekeva noun, and so it's really the kingdom of Sheba. Maybe this is inspired because Sheba is mentioned in the beginning of Iyov, and it's an army, a marauding army, and so it makes more sense that if that was a man and not a queen leading this marauding army. Vayhi hayom vayabo b'nei Elohim litaseb al Adonai vayabo gam hasatan betocham vayomer Hashem el hasatan ma'ayin tavo vaya'an hasatan vegomer. We're now going to quote the beginning of the story of Sefer Iyov and comment on it. And the beginning it says that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Hashem. And Satan also, he was one of the angels, and he came to Hashem, and Hashem says, where are you coming from? And Satan said, from going back and forth. Let's look at the exact language. Roaming all over the earth and walking around on it. And Hashem says to the Satan, have you seen my servant Iyov? Right? He's so great. The Midrash is going to fill in a little bit more of the dialogue. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam, shatidi b'chol ha'olam kulo v'lo masati ne'eman ke'abdecha Abraham. So, according to this Midrash, according to the Peshat, Hashem says, where are you going? Where are you coming from? As going all over the land. And Hashem says, first, okay, have you seen Iyov? But the Midrash is inserting another line. That first, the Satan says, have you seen, Ribono shel olam, I went across the whole earth, and I have not found anybody more faithful to you than your servant Abraham. That shemarta bo, kumi talech ba'aretz leorka udrochba, ki lecha etenena. You told him, go and walk around the land and its breadth and its length, and I'm giving you the entire land. It seems that the Midrash is taking the words here, mitalechba, mishut ba'as mitalechba, which sound just like Abraham, who was told, go walk around the land and you will inquire the land. So this is being taken as the Satan saying, I just came from noticing Abraham, who you promised the whole land to. And yet, even though Hashem, you promised the whole land, even so, when his Sarah died and he did not have any place to bury her, and he had to go and spend 400 silver shekel, a huge amount, and he did not complain against you, Hashem. He didn't say, Hashem, you told me you're going to give me the whole land, and now look, I have to buy this one little plot for a grave for 400 shekel. He didn't complain. What an amazing, look how faithful, what an amazing servant Abraham is. So we're inserting that. That's what Satan said, because Hashem said, I was going, you need something here. Hashem said, where are you coming from? He said, from going around the land. Okay, what did he see, in the land? And so it makes sense that Satan would have said, here's what I noticed, that Abraham seems like the most faithful servant. And then, Vayomer Hashem el Satan, Hasamta el bechal abdi Iyov, ki en kamo ba'aretz. And then Hashem counters. He says, well, Abraham is pretty good, but have you seen Iyov? He is even more faithful. There's nobody like him in all the land. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Gadol ha'ne'emar b'Iyov, yoter mima shene'emar Abraham. Dilu b'Abraham ketiv, ki ata yadati ki yireh Elohim ata. B'Iyov ketiv, ish tam v'yashar yireh Elohim v'sar me'era. That the way Iyov is described, Iyov is even greater than the way Abraham is described, because regarding Abraham it says, now I know that you fear Hashem. That's all it says for Abraham. But for Iyov it says, he is perfect and upright, and he also fears Hashem, and he turns away from evil. So you see, Iyov is described as being even greater than Abraham, and that's what Hashem is saying. Or Satan, you think Abraham is great? Look at Iyov. Now, in what way does he turn away from evil? Amar bi Abba bar Shemuel Iyov vatran b'mamono haya. Minago shalom ten chasi peduta lechen bani Iyov vitera mishelo. Iyov was turned away from evil, in that he was forgiving with his money. If someone owed him a little bit of money, he didn't care about it, which is unusual. Usually, someone pays a storekeeper even a half a peduta. Even if you buy a little thing, you buy like one olive, it's a half a penny. How are you going to pay for it, right? Usually, a storekeeper is like, like, oh, you have to pay me somehow. You have to pay me more. What are you going to do? But Eov would say, if you owe him just a little bit, he said, forget about it. So you see that he avoided evil in that way. Vayana Satan el Hashem, et Hashem, vayomar, hachinam yareh el Eov Elohim, halo ata sachta ba'ado ba'ad beto v'gomer, mai ma'aseh yada berachta, amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Rav Yitzchak, kol hanotel peruta me'Eov mitbarech. And so then the Satan told Hashem, well, you think Eov is really so great? What do you think? He fears you for nothing? You have hedged him about, you protected him from all sides, and his house, right, is protected on all sides. You have blessed the work of his hands, is a continuation of the pasuk, and his cattle increases in the land. So what does it mean, that Maaseh Yadav Berachta? In what way is the work of his hands blessed? Rabbi Shemuel bar Rav Yitzchak explains that anyone who takes a peruta from Eov is blessed. Like the Rebbe giving out $1, you take that $1 and you go start a business. And so not only was Eov himself blessed, everyone he interacted with, any money, even a coin that he gave to someone else, that person got blessing too. Now, what does the rest of the pasuk mean? That his livestock increased in the land. To say it increased, what's it mean in the land? It means that his flock went beyond the natural order of the world. In the natural order of the world, wolves come and kill the goats. But for Eov, the goats were so strong, they killed the wolves, and therefore they were able to increase beyond the normal way of the land. And we quote the continuation of what Satan says to Hashem, but Eov, yes, he's very righteous, but only because you give him everything. Only just put your hand forth and touch him, meaning give him a little suffering, and you'll see he's going to curse you. And Hashem says to the Satan, okay, fine, everything he has in your power, you can take away all this stuff, even his family, but don't touch him himself, meaning don't give him personal sickness or suffering. And so then, one day, all of his sons and daughters were eating and drinking in the house of the oldest brother. They would take turns and eat in different people's houses. And then a messenger comes and says, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them. What does this mean, that the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding? It seems not to make sense. Was it plowing season? In which case there's nothing growing, because they're plowing and then they're going to put the seeds in the ground, and then you have to wait a few months till it grows. On the other hand, says the donkeys were eating, so that means there is grass growing or grain growing. So what's going on? Amar Rabbi Yochanan teaches that this means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Eov a taste of the world to come. That in this world, you have to wait a long time. First you plant, and then it grows, and only then you can enjoy it. But in the world to come, there'll be instant gratification, right? You just order something, and it gets delivered, same day delivery. And so too, this is a taste of the world to come, that Eov had everything going for him. He didn't even have to wait from the time he planted. He could just plant, and then very same day, he had the donkeys already eating. And so this is an example of Eov. He had everything going for him. Of course, he's going to be faithful to Hashem. Let's see if he'll be faithful even when he suffers loss. And we'll continue with this long midrash on the book of Eov on the following daf. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.